Hola, are you there?
Hello, beautiful. How are you?
I'm doing super, super well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I'm cracking up at how fun and creative you are because I was definitely sitting here listening to Bootylicious as like the hold music, getting my life, cracking up that like that is what you chose for like the waiting in the lobby music. It's amazing.
I feel like Bootylicious is the way to start to kick off anything. So
Absolutely.
even a funeral, okay? Like I need Bootylicious to kick off my funeral. Let's go ahead and introduce you. What is your name? Who are you? Where can people find you if they want to find you online? How do we know each other?
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Racquel. I am Insta homies turned, I think, real life friends with Ella, and I just adore you. And the only social media that I have, and my handle is it's the Rock, ITSTHERACQ on Instagram, and that's it.
Yeah, so you're one of my social media friends, which is kind of weird to
Mm-hmm.
say, but that's definitely the age we're in. I have no idea how we met. I know that around 2012, 2013, I had a relatively popular blog, a dating blog.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when I got an Instagram, all my blog followers like started following me on Instagram. So
Mm-hmm.
they probably got really disappointed when I stopped blogging, but it might be because of that. I have no idea, but whoever followed whom first, like what I love about your page is that you, of course, add humor to what you say, but a lot of what you say is so, on the surface, it could feel very simple, but when you really take a step back and look at the propositions that you bring forth, there's so much wisdom, and a lot of us are not talking about it. And of course, you sprinkle in again your humor and so forth, but it's a lot of, how do you call it, memes, words, not a
Yes,
lot of
yeah,
pictures, right? Um,
exactly.
and a lot of them are yours, or you might pull something, like you just pull these really great one liner nuggets. For right now, I'm looking at your page. It's okay to clap for me, sis, because when you start winning, I'm gonna clap for you too.
Amen.
Just like these types of, they're about dating or not dating or wanting marriage or kids. I mean, you just talk about life. And something that I thought would be really interesting for us to touch upon, and you touch upon this in some of your posts, is breaking generational cycles. This was a dialogue that my dad unintentionally or unknowingly started ingraining in me and my brother at an early age, because my dad very much broke a lot of cycles and how he pivoted his life. I mean, made a total 180 on everything that was handed to him as a child.
Mhm.
But there's still work to be done. So I kind of
Right.
wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, and we can kind of share family history and structure and see. Can you tell me? You and I, we aren't we aren't hanging out every weekend, so I don't know a lot
Mm-hmm.
about you and your background. I'm curious as to the people who have shaped you into being this wise, intelligent, kind, inspirational, lovely, beautiful soul of a person that you are today.
You were making me blush. First of all, thank you so much. Such high compliments. But okay, like let's get into it. I definitely have kind of a different slash, I would say, the epitome of modern family dynamic that I grew up with. My parents, God bless them, they dated for a short period of time before conceiving me, and then broke up shortly thereafter. The way I describe it is they were two consenting adults that, ended up being pregnant with baby, had me decide to co-parent. They both got married within a month of each other when I was 3 years old. So I've had four parents, at least four parents my whole life, two different households. So it's really interesting. I really went between two parent households, and I'm so very blessed for that. But they couldn't be. I can't say they couldn't be any more different, but they were definitely different. So growing up with my mom and my second dad, I grew up out here in Pennsylvania, in California, and my dad and second mom were always on the East Coast, primarily outside of the DC area, which is where I was born. So even just in that short little little snippet, there are a lot of dynamics and a lot of things going on, just from the very beginning, from when I came into this world. A lot of different personalities, and everyone from different parts of almost everyone from different parts of the country. I always try to say like my second mom or second dad, because I am very blessed, and I do have to kind of agree with you. I'm very blessed, and it is unique that like I said, my stepmom, stepdad, they both they treated me and always have loved me like their own. Like you can't tell them otherwise either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So for your step parents, like they were a part of your upbringing. They really
Mm-hmm.
influenced who you are today. And
Absolutely.
again, I don't know these four individuals who raised you, but just even hearing that your mom and dad were able to, even for your dad, not knowing anything about him, just on age alone, I would question, which is a question I love to ask my friends when they're complaining about their parents. I would question and say, who taught your dad how to be a dad? That
Mm-hmm.
he made the decision to be a part of a woman with whom he wasn't going to have a relationship, he wasn't going to marry necessarily, and raise a child, co-parent. You know, co-parenting is a new
Mm-hmm.
term. That term didn't even exist when we were born.
No, no, not at all. It's you're right. Co-parenting, it's not a new concept at all, but I think it's starting to be understood as a necessity. And when it really comes down to it, it's, I think their mindset was like, all right, we didn't work out, but we got this baby to raise, and she's not going to be a baby forever. How do we go about, and she is a Black girl going to be a Black woman. How do we go about just raising her the best that we can to handle the world the best that she can, with or without us? Um, and as I get older, I think we all tend to do this, particularly if you have good parents. As you think about it and you talk about it, it becomes more and more real to you. Like, wow, my parents really did the damn thing. Like, they really did pull together and do what they had to do. And I know not everybody has that experience, but it took me to become an adult to realize exactly like you said. I mean, having four different personalities combine and join together to be the village to raise a child. You're going to have different opinions, you're going to have different perspectives and that sort of thing. But I didn't even know until I was an adult how much their opinions differed. So they really did a good job in just being a united front. Even like as a kid, teenagers, you try to like pit your parents against each other or pull like little things. I could never like do one thing in one household and then get away with something completely different in another.
I was able to pit my parents against each other because they
Mm-hmm.
refused to communicate with each other.
Right.
And so as we look at generational cycles, I've had more
Mm-hmm.
epiphanies in the last 5 years, looking at how my dad was raised, how my mom was raised. I had an epiphany in the last year that the struggles I have in my relationship with my mother, they might be slightly different, but from an outside perspective, they're virtually the same problems that she has with
Mm-hmm.
her mother. And furthermore, my great grandmother passed away a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother and my great grandmother had the
Had.
same issues. And so last year I kind of had this thing with my mom, and I was like, are you just going to do what your mother did with her mother and what you've done with your mother, and now you're going to do that with me? Like, is that
Mm.
what we're doing here? Because it seems so obvious. And again, the nuances, right? The details of why you
Mhm.
have the strain could be different. So when you're in it, you don't even realize you're repeating the cycle because it doesn't look exactly the same. But when you really take a step back and go, huh, she has issue. She wasn't talking to her mother when she died. You're not talking to your mother now, and I'm not talking to you.
Right. Right. It's
What
the
are we
same
doing?
spirit. It's the same
Mhm.
spirit that's like going in within the family or looping within these. Yeah, no, I totally, totally understand and can relate to that. Absolutely. And generational curses, I think again it's one of those topics, kind of like co-parenting, where it's not a new concept, but people I think are just starting to really become hip to it. I definitely see it with like my biological parents' families, particularly my mom's side. I'm probably more sensitive to and pick up on more I would say patterns, lifestyle choices, decisions being made, or pivotal decisions being made kind of at the same time. And I'm probably more sensitive to it because my mother's family is primarily women. So we definitely have that whole matriarchal, and I hate to say it, but it's like the trope of the strong Black woman, and that's definitely throughout my mom's family. The first one that I can think of off the top of my head, one of like my epiphanies that I've had in the last year that I actually had to share with my mom is that with us being a family full of women, almost all of us between my grandmother, my cousins, my aunt, my mother, and myself, we all have different last names. And
Okay.
that's a very interesting thing to me, just in terms of how we have or have not kept our families together and just what that means. So again, so with me, when I was born out of wedlock. I have a different last name than my mother. I have my dad's last name. My mother has her stepdad's last name, who my grandmother was married to at the time my mother was born. So there's that, even just one generation ahead of me. And then my grandmother had a different last name than I believe her mother. So my great grandmother. So just looking at little things like that, you can see, I guess the most obvious curse or pattern that comes with that is just having kids out of wedlock, and not having a solid family unit when we're bringing babies into this world.
It's so funny that you say that though, because my mom, my mom and all her sisters have the same last name, which is weird.
Right.
Because they're all married. And furthermore, the crazy thing is, like, because my mom made that epiphany, she's like, all of us sisters have the same last name, their maiden name. They still have their maiden name for different reasons. The ones who are married didn't change their name. And they didn't change their name because they got married later in life. And they're like, well, I've already been this for like the first 40 whatever years of my life. I'm not changing it now. I have one aunt who named her kids after her.
Oh, interesting.
So she gave her kids her maiden name, which I find interesting. My mom and I never had the same last name, and that was something that always bothered me and embarrassed me. She technically does have my last name, but she started using her maiden name again, again when I was like 7 years old. Yeah,
Right.
and then let's see. And then my other aunt is divorced. And then the other aunt, I don't know if she's married. I always forget if they got married or if they're just cohabitating. But either way, like she, again, her kids have her last name.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So
now, can I ask you, is that a cultural thing?
No.
It's just how it happened.
To an extent, look, if you really want to say, because this is my Mexican side of the family, if you really want to say, like, yes, in the Mexican culture, you do get your mother's maiden last name. It becomes your middle name in the Mexican culture. So there is probably some really, really subconscious tie there. But ultimately, it's kind of what you just said. These are all women who've been divorced or had children with men with whom they no longer have relationships with. Like that's just the fact for the 4 women in my family. And again, if we take it up to my grandmother, same thing. So
interesting.
It's really crazy to me that you have to almost like write down your family tree and almost write everybody's drama and then
literally
see if you can spot the similarities, because
and the common thread. Yes.
Because again, like I could look at my mom's 4 sisters, they all have very different situations, but the fact of the matter is at the end of the day they all have the same last name and they're they're older. Where are you going to find 4 sisters in their 50s and 60s who all still have the same last name?
Oh no, yeah, exactly. No, that's like that it's really interesting how we kind of just discovered like the same, exactly what you said, like the same kind of generational curse. And I don't know if that like is so harsh or if I need to really keep on repeating that. I think I'm just going to say pattern now, the same patterns, but indicative in different ways. That's really kind of funny. That's really, really interesting. Wow.
And that's why I want to have more of these conversations. So like even yesterday, I had a friend reach out to me and she's, was a little upset about something with her dad, right? And I said to her, which is like I mentioned earlier, what I say to everybody who has a qualm with their parent, including my brother. I say this to my brother. I'm like, okay, you're mad at your father. You're mad at your mother. Who taught them how to be a parent?
Amen. Exactly.
Who taught them?
Exactly.
Because I look at my dad. Who taught my dad how to be a dad? Well, for the first 12 years of his life, no one. He bounced
Right.
he bounced around like a basketball. He was discarded. He was unwanted from the day he was
Mm.
born. His birth certificate where it says father is blank because
Mm.
his mother didn't even know who could be the father. And didn't even have anyone that she could even write a fucking name on a birth certificate. My dad's birth certificate is blank where it should say dad. And
Mm.
so whenever my brother, has problems with my dad, that's the first thing I say. I'm like, okay, but you have to look at who taught him how to be a father. Because I'd
Mm-hmm.
argue that he did a really damn good job with the little he was given. Now
Amen.
at 12 years old, he was adopted, and I think that was his saving grace. And I love my grandfather, so I have a grandpa, but the dynamic is difficult. At 12 years old, a lot of who you are, a lot of the trauma that you've experienced is going to stay with you, right? So
Yeah.
while there was a lot of grace in my father's adoption later in life, and every podcast I'm like, I'm not gonna cry.
Oh.
There are still there's still trauma there. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I'm just like, okay, like let's look at this. And I do find it fascinating when I say that to someone, because when I've said that again to my girlfriend last night, she was like, you're right. My dad immigrated to this country.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're right. My dad's dad passed away at when he was 6 years old.
Yep.
And we kind of overlook those things because for us, we see our parents and they're already grown up.
Yep.
So we
Their
don't,
mom and dad.
yeah, we don't see their journey. We don't see their trauma. They, for the most part, try to hide their trauma. We might see symptoms of the trauma, but we're not going to see them
Mm.
going through the trauma. and and that's where we maybe miss the cycles,
Mm-hmm.
and then can't effectively break them. And so where I say my dad really broke the cycle is my dad, again, I don't know, but if I looked at his mother with whom he never had a relationship, if I
Mm.
were not never, but she didn't raise him. If I look at his
Right.
mother and I were to sit down with her, she's no longer around, but if I were to sit down with her, I guarantee, and I said to her, who taught you how to be a mother? I guarantee it would, I would get some interesting answers. My
Right.
my father was raised by a woman. Okay, it sounds crazy to say. My father was raised by his grandmother. My father was
Mine
raised
too.
by my father was raised by a woman who was raised by a woman who was born into slavery.
Mm.
That doesn't
Mm.
feel far away,
It's
when I think of
not,
it that
girl.
way. Because I'm like, the person who taught my father to be an adult was raised and taught how to be an adult by someone who was born into slavery.
Girl, same, like that's exactly the same with my mother, and that's what people also don't understand, like particularly as Black people in this country. Like people act like slavery was so long ago, but with certain families it's only a matter of 2 or 3 generations away, because it's the same thing with my mother. My mother was born in 1963. Her mother was around. I love my grandmother, good relationship with her, but my mother was raised by her grandmother, and her grandmother was born in 1893. So she was born into sharecropping in South Carolina, and her parents were literally freed slaves.
I mean,
So,
the emancipation happened in 1865. So,
literally.
yeah. And so, you're saying that she was born in the late 1800s. Hello. I mean, it's like, and we know that even when slavery was, quote unquote, abolished.
Right. Black people were so just destitute in this country and so clueless. Black people in the South look to massa for everything that, once slavery, quote unquote, ended, they went immediately to the government to figure out, well, what do we do? If this land isn't owned by massa anymore, like, where am I going to live? How am I going to eat? Because, everybody was living off of table scraps and the leftovers and that sort of thing. So, and you got to figure, it's like, if we have parents that are raised by people that know these stories and are a direct product of this, what do you think they're instilling in our parents? Like, what kind of fears, what kind of associations, what kind of traumas that are being directly passed down? It's really deep. Like, it's deep. It's deep. I probably start rambling. I'm so sorry, but it's like,
no,
that's just really deep.
You're fine. Well, and again, like, it's so fascinating to me because I do have that dichotomy, and for you having 4 parents, what I think is fascinating about that is you could almost cherry pick. Ooh, I don't like that dad's family does that, and I kind of like that my second dad's family does that, and ooh, like, I like this, and you have more examples of function or dysfunction where you can cherry pick what you want and consciously decide what you don't.
That's very true.
I feel similarly in the sense that, I have 2 parents who come from very, very different backgrounds. I still am fascinated that they ever connected in the first place.
Right.
There's so many reasons why they're very different, but just their backgrounds. My mother is an immigrant. She was born in Mexico. My father, he comes from essentially a lineage, if you want to call it that, of being in this country for the last 200 years. I've kind of been able to do that. At least I'm not in a situation. And I think this is where it's harder for people to recognize dysfunction, is when both of their parents kind of come from the same type of brokenness or dysfunction. And where I don't want people to get lost is like taking ethnicity out of it. There's dysfunction I see, I have a lot of wealthy, privileged friends. There's still a lot of dysfunction in those houses too.
Oh, hell yeah.
So this isn't just about poverty. This isn't about race. I think it's a relevant call out when you're having a conversation, especially for us as Black women, that can't be negated. But I think we could have the same exact conversation without bringing in the ethnicity. But it's not, oh, this is my problem because I'm Black. It's like, no, but like literally my father was raised by a woman who was raised by a woman who was born into slavery. Like, that's literally a little close. That's a little close for me. That's
exactly.
Like, holy shit. And that's where, again, I just love to ask a question. Who taught your mom how to be a mom?
Yep, exactly. Where did she get that example from? What are her examples? What are her resources? What are her reference points?
And what are yours? I find it disappointing, especially in today's age, that I think it's fair to say that having a child is the biggest commitment decision of your life. And my question for people is, okay, you want a child, but why? Why do you want to make this big decision? And people don't have the answer. And I think it's disappointing. And I think it's reckless. I feel like if you're going to make the decision to have a child, you should do it with intention. My follow-up question is, who taught you how to be a mom? Look at the figures, whether it's your mother, your father, your grandmother, your teachers, whoever, who influenced your idea of what being a mom is, what being a dad is, and how are you going to break the cycle with your child? Because if you're not thinking about these things before this child comes into the world, well, shit, before you make the child and choose the partner you have this child, then we're going to be repeating the same cycle. And I think about that in terms of my daughter, should I ever have one, of, am I going to do the same damn thing that's been done now for the last 3 generations, me being the 4th? How am I going to do this differently and be mindful from day one? Have you looked at certain patterns of what you would want to adapt, or certain patterns that you'd want to let go of? Or have you recognized specific generational cycles that continue to repeat themselves? And perhaps even within yourself, you're recognizing those patterns that you're perpetuating.
But the first pattern I would say is even just in their parenthood, period. Like I said, both of my parents were actually raised by their grandmothers, but they both raised their kids, and they both did so intentionally. So that's number one. Number two, what I would say is what I can say, particularly in my mom's family, there is definitely an inclination, not an inclination, I guess. We're predisposed to, I would say, like substance abuse and alcoholism. And those are symptoms of self-medicating and depression. With that being said, I have seen it with my mom going through, major life traumas and events where the self-medication did come out. But what I will say is is really great. And it's just really interesting witnessing with her is her breaking a generational curse of wanting to do better, of, first of all, even being married and also raising me as a wife, because that was a big thing too. So I saw her break it with that. I also saw her break it with her seeking therapy and seeking help when she's felt like she's needed it. And I know she's the first one of, her, my grandmother, aunt, whoever, in her previous generations to do that. Whether it's unintentional or she did it knowingly, I definitely think she set that example for me to know, like, it's okay to seek help. It's okay to not be okay sometimes. Like, yeah, you got to be strong. It's part of being a woman. That's one thing she's always told me, is being a woman is not for the weary. But it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to seek resources and seek help if you need it.
Yeah, that was something that I definitely was given a much better childhood than either of my parents had. And for that, I don't fault them for anything, because to me, that's success,
Exactly.
And that's where I say, who taught your parent how to be a parent? It's like, you're sitting here and you're upset because your mother or father don't handle certain circumstances properly. And that's annoying, but it's like, but did they give you a better life? I think if you can't even take a step back and look at the generational patterns, and then you're having children, you're just doomed to repeat the same damn cycle. And it'll be that moment when you overreact at your child coming home late at night and you scream at them and verbally berate them. It'll be in that moment that you go, holy shit, I turned into my father. But by then, it's basically too late.
And that's that dreaded moment everybody has. Oh my God, I'm turning into my mother. I'm turning into my father. I sound just like them. One of like your first signs of like maturity and really growing up is when you start seeing mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt as people and human beings, and just adults just trying to make it in this world like you are. But even before the motherhood and fatherhood comes in play, it's like, well, who taught you how to be a woman? What was your example of womanhood? What was your example of manhood? Like, what does that mean to you? How did you define that for yourself before procreating and trying to teach somebody else what it means to be a human being?
So yes, you're touching upon something that I've always been a little fascinated, I guess, about my brother and I, because my brother and I are very different, but it's for the exact same reasons. So he is what I call a serial monogamous. He cannot be single. He's had a very serious girlfriend his entire, since he was 16. Whereas I'm the opposite. I'm more like, I say in my head, like, okay, marriage is the goal. Let me see this person. Oh, I go on a few dates. Nope, that's not marriage material. Next. Bye. Not good enough. Don't like me enough. Not strong enough. Not going to be. So it's like weird because we have different ways of manifesting essentially the same fear. That is interesting to me.
It's almost like you literally have two different testing methods, or like two different like experimentation methods, if you will.
Yes. But ultimately what I think is sad for both of us and makes me truly sad is we didn't have an example of a loving, functional marriage. And so it's like, do I even know how to be a good wife? We know the ideas that we've seen from TV, but the fact is we haven't had many examples of loving. I have very, very few loving, long-lasting marriages that I look up to. in my
Mm-hmm.
life. And the ones that I do look up to, I'm a little too far removed to really know the nitty-gritty details of that marriage. And so
Yeah, I was just about to say that too. Like sometimes it's like in the ones that you even do look up to, it's like, damn, but I'm not there behind closed doors to really see what that's like.
and look, if I'm being real, because I talk about wanting a relationship and this and that. If I'm honest, a big hesitation for me is what I just said in terms of no one's really taught me how to be a good wife.
Mm,
I have never seen a functional relationship. I've had a few functional relationships, um,
mm-hmm,
that for which I'm very grateful, but it required a lot of patience on my partner's part. It
mm-hmm.
required a lot of open communication. And to your point, it requires a lot of therapy, not therapy about the relationship, but therapy within myself to make sure
Personal.
that I'm not becoming codependent or that I'm not
Mm-hmm.
self-sabotaging myself or that I'm not
Right.
settling. And so to your, if I had to say in one word, if I had to say it just in one word, how to address and break generational cycles, I would say therapy. I don't
Man.
understand why more people aren't going to therapy.
I'm telling you, there's such a stigma with it. Like there has to be something
No.
wrong, and it's like, no, there doesn't have to be. But let's be very real. Everybody has something freaking wrong. Everybody has a hang up. Everybody has something that they need to work out, even if they're, this person's issue is a little bit more surface or a little bit more shallow than the next person. It doesn't matter. It's still their issue to work out.
And I've had several friends say, yeah, I probably should go to therapy. And oh, yeah, I've looked into it. Or they go one time in 5 years and they're like, well, I went that one time 5 years ago, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't have a friend that I know of, a close friend that consistently goes to therapy. I'm the only person I know that consistently goes to therapy. Um,
Mm.
and I feel a desire to talk about that because I know there's a stigma to it. You work through a lot, you get a lot of resources. I think of therapy almost as like a life class. Your therapist isn't telling you what to do. A good therapist doesn't tell you what to do. A
Mm-hmm.
good therapist listens to your concerns and gives you a tool of some sort, whether it is a book or a speaker or medical research, to allow you to take those tools and decide this is what I want to pull from. They're giving you extra resources. That's how I look at therapy. I don't go to a therapist looking for advice.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I go to therapy so I can figure out which advice of my own I want to follow and kind of
Right.
talk out the consequences to a neutral party that um, you know, isn't biased one way or the other in a certain decision I'm making.
Mhm. Exactly. And I kind of to add to that, I completely agree. Because every now and then they like, at least I know my therapist, she might, I don't even know if she necessarily offers advice as so much as provides a new perspective. And that in itself is a resource too. You know what I mean? When you're just talking something out and they just ask one of those just prompting questions or food for thought questions that you say, you know what? I never thought about it that way. I'm going to sit on that because maybe that will kind of change my feelings on that. Or maybe, just perspective can be everything sometimes. I think a good therapist is an educator too, in terms of providing resources. And I think you said it, you hit the nail on the head. It's like they provide resources or tools or perspective for you to figure out which of your advice you want to follow.
Well, I am so glad that we had the time to talk
I
today
am
because you were just
too.
so wise, and it's so cool that I could just hop on the phone with someone and just have this conversation, not scripted, just kind of that's
Right.
what I want, just sitting around and talking, and I am so grateful. On a final note, do you have anything else you want to add or just anything else that you have to say before we close it out?
Not in particular. I'm so thankful to have been able to come on and chat with you. And like, I've told you time and time again that I love your curiosity. I love the way your mind works, but I really appreciate how you share that with us, with the world, and you give people a chance to talk and to express themselves and to converse. I think it's wonderful. So just thank you again.
You were way too sweet. We'll just sit here and braid each other's hair and just give each other
I know.
compliments all day. Okay, so just one more time, where can people find you if they're interested in following you on Instagram and seeing your really inspirational, wise posts?
Oh, you're so sweet. It's going to be on Instagram. It's my only social media, and my name is It's the Rock, ITSTHERACQ.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Racquel. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye. Hey, thanks for checking this shit show out. If you have an idea you'd like to be featured here, my email is ellaurbellapodcast@gmail.com. Thank you.